I am going to welcome an update from Health Canada on the pediatric drug plan. So Dr. Alicia Croker is the director of the Centre for Policy, Pediatrics and International Collaboration in the Health, Products and Food branch of Health Canada. And in this position, Dr. Croker is responsible for developing ways to increase access to safe and effective health products for pediatric populations in Canada, among probably far too many other things in your file. So thank you, Alicia, and we look forward to your update.
All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much. I am very, very excited to be here. I tried to make it last year, but unfortunately that didn't work out. And so very excited to be here today to meet all of you and to learn from all of you. Thank you. I think over the next little while, I'm really looking forward to that. So I have 20 minutes and I will do my very best to stick to that, even though this is a topic that I could speak about forever. So if you do have any questions or want to talk more afterwards, just please feel free to come and find me. I am a public servant, so my life is boring and I have nothing to disclose. So it was back in 2020, the end of 2020, when Health Canada officially launched its Pediatric Drug Action Plan. This was after a lot of discussions and consultations with pediatric health experts, with patients, with families. But we were able to talk to a great number of people to really try to understand what the issues are. Within this group, I likely don't need to go over all of the issues, but the final result, of course, is that children in Canada don't have access to the medicines that they need. And if they are, they're often not in appropriate formulations. And so what we wanted to do with our Pediatric Drug Action Plan, or our PDAP, is to develop and implement mechanisms so that infants, children, and youth in Canada have access to the medications that they need in age-appropriate formulations. This, of course, is not something that Health Canada can do by itself. We need to work with a whole bunch of people, including all of you, in order to really accomplish these three goals that we have listed here. So first, we're looking to find ways to increase the development of essential medicines and formulations. Second, to improve access to pediatric medicines and formulations. So of course, we know that there are more pediatric medicines that are available in other jurisdictions, like in Europe or the US, for example. And so that second goal is really to improve access in Canada to those medications. And then our third goal is more of a transparency angle, so providing more information on this topic to people in Canada. So the full PDAP is quite extensive, and so we've had to prioritize a little bit on what we will focus on first. And so we've picked three things that we think will have the biggest return on investment, at least initially. And so first, I was going to say we were looking to, but we actually have implemented a pediatric pilot that essentially will help us test out what a pediatric regulation could look like in Canada. So that's something that the US has done, that Europe has done, and some other jurisdictions as well. And we'll talk about what the pieces of that are, but it's essentially a requirement for industry to test products in children that are expected to be used in children. So these are adult medications that they bring to the market. If it's likely that those medicines will be used in pediatric populations, they're required to conduct trials in children as well, and then submit that data to the regulator so that there can be a pediatric indication. The next piece is developing a national priority list. And so this is to help us first identify what drugs are urgently needed in Canada, and then trying to figure out a way to bring those products to Canada. And then the third one is looking for ways that we can facilitate access to certain pediatric drugs. So that's mostly working with industry to figure out what ways, whether it's a regulation, whether it's some sort of incentive, whether it's some sort of regulatory flexibility, what's needed for industry to bring these products to Canada, especially if they're already in market or on market somewhere else. So first, looking at the pediatric regulation. And so, like I said, there are jurisdictions that already have pediatric regulations or legislations, most notably the US and Europe as well. And the main purpose of these is to increase the availability of medicines for pediatric populations in those jurisdictions. And I think at Health Canada, we thought back in, I think it was 2007 that they came into effect. We thought that if Health Canada, we could implement an incentive to bring those products to Canada. If the testing was already being done in other jurisdictions, that it would be very easy to incentivize that data to be submitted to Health Canada. Over the years, we found that that is not the case. And so we are looking at what a regulation could potentially look like in Canada. So in terms of what these requirements look like in other jurisdictions is essentially what I said. So sponsors, those are industry, they are asked to submit their pediatric studies at the time of the adult submission. That almost never happens. And so because they do the adult studies first and then they do the pediatric studies. And so as sort of a hold or a promise to conduct those studies, when the adult studies are submitted, sponsors will submit a pediatric plan. And the plan will outline all the studies that they will be doing. And so that's sort of the hold for the study to come in. And then once those trials are done, industry is required to submit that data to the regulator, and then it will go through the regular process. So what we did, and we've launched that now in at the end of February, is we have, in advance of considering regulations or legislation, and so this is in policy, we are asking industry to essentially do the same things. So when they come in with their adult submission, if they have an approved pediatric plan from Europe or from the US, we're asking them to submit it with their package. And then to submit the data later on once they have the studies done. And so this is really to try to get pediatric data to come to Canada so that we can get more information on safety, efficacy, dosage, et cetera, of drugs in the pediatric population, to help bring Health Canada into alignment with other jurisdictions that do have these requirements. But I think most importantly, at least for us right now, is to inform future policy and regulatory initiatives to see what we can do and if it makes sense for Canada as a jurisdiction to have these kinds of requirements as well. So for now, participation in the pilot is voluntary, and all sponsors with in-scope submissions, we're asking them to participate. If they don't, we are asking them why not, and they will be asked to complete a short survey just to give us a bit more information about their submission when it comes in. Moving now into the national priority list of pediatric drugs. So like I said, the main goal of this is to first identify which drugs are urgently needed in Canada, because we do hear that a lot. But when we went to look for what drugs are missing, what are needed most urgently, that kind of information, it wasn't available. And so the first big goal of this initiative was to identify what the gaps are, what's urgently needed in Canada. So the specific goals were to sort of look at what's needed in Canada and then highlight this to stakeholders, including both industry, who will need to submit those drugs to Canada, and the provinces and territories for reimbursement related purposes, but to really highlight the drugs that are urgently needed in Canada. And then to help us, depending on what the list is, what the drugs look like, help us develop regulatory mechanisms that we can use to support industry in bringing those products to Canada. So we've been working with a really, really excellent pediatric external reference group. PERG is not an ideal acronym, but it is the acronym for this group, which is co-chaired by Dr. Charlotte Moore-Hepburn, who is sitting right over there, along with Dr. Catherine Letellian from Montreal. And so we've been working with this group to help us figure out what of the drugs that we've received. And I think on the next slide, I have how exactly we've done that, how we are getting to our final list. So we do have specific inclusion criteria, and so it's on here. It has to address a disease or disease area or condition with a high unmet need, of course. It has to lack approval for sale in Canada, or a pediatric indication in Canada, or a child-friendly formulation. And it does have to be approved for sale in a trusted foreign jurisdiction. And this is sort of to get us to a manageable list of products. So the nomination process, it's been a very, very interesting project. Yeah, no, interesting is the perfect word. It's been sort of really, really eye-opening. We and the co-chairs had multiple webinars trying to get the word out of what it was that we were doing so that we could raise awareness and explain what we were doing, because what we really needed from pediatric medical experts was the expertise in telling us what was missing, what the gaps were. And I think at the beginning, we were a little bit nervous that we wouldn't get any nominations. So we wanted to sort of get the word out about that. We did hold a 60-day nomination. And I think we were all quite surprised with the number of nominations that we got back. So there's 905 nominations that came through, which I think just underscores the very deep need for pediatric products in Canada. We did go through all 905 submissions. There were 119 drugs that we were able to screen in based on the criteria. And then those products went to the PERG, who developed a really excellent way to analyze the drugs and prioritize the drugs. And I think we now finally have a short list of drugs that have come back to us that we get to work with and consult on soon. So we're really, really excited about the next steps of that. And so we are looking to launch a consultation. And so that'll be a broad consultation. So if you go to our website, you'll be able to see that as well. We also will be focusing our consultations with industry as well, and with provinces and territories too, because we'll need both sides to help us bring those products to Canada and then make them accessible to people in Canada. And then over the fall, we'll analyze the feedback from those consultations and hopefully by the beginning of next year, publish that list so that we can start bringing those products to Canada. The idea would be that the list would be evergreen. And so as some products come off, we'll be able to add additional products on and sort of keep that cycle and that system going. So those are our major updates. Like I said, really happy to answer any questions that you may have. And if you want to talk more, just come and find me. Happy to discuss further.
So from an impact perspective, if we have this list of priority medicines, is there a way that we can help fill some of the evidence gaps? Or what is your vision for how we can help support bringing some more data on these essential medicines?
Yeah, so that's a good question. And I think one thing, and I didn't say this in the presentation, but one thing that I love about working with the pediatric community is how good you are at pulling yourselves together and speaking with one voice, which very rarely happens with any of the stakeholders that we work with. So it's been really, really wonderful to be able to sort of collect information that way and to be able to work with you on, this nomination process and on hearing and understanding what the issues are so that we can focus our solutions on sort of the root of all of these problems. In terms of what can be done, I think that there might be a couple different pieces. So first is advocacy, which you also do very well. So a lot of the letters that you send, they eventually make their way to me, but it does raise awareness at the various levels, wherever you send it to the minister, the deputy, or the assistant deputy minister. It does raise awareness, and that does go a long way in helping to support pushing these ideas through and making sure that pediatrics stays on the radar, because I think that is absolutely critical. And it's how I got pediatrics in my title. That was one of the recommendations actually from pediatric experts, that we have a group that has pediatrics in its name so that it helps everyone remember. So that was excellent. Also, I'm wondering, and this is obviously me just sort of brainstorming here, but I'm wondering if there's something that we can do maybe through CIHR as well, if there are outstanding issues or, data that we need for really old drugs, for example, where it's maybe not overly likely that the sponsor is going to want to come or do additional studies, or if there's gaps in knowledge. I feel like this group might be a perfect group to sort of fill in some of those gaps. And so that's something that we can consider and sort of highlight what they are based on the drugs that we have on our list.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
I don't think you have to worry about us continuing our advocacy for this room. They're a pretty inspired group.
Yeah.
Any questions for Alicia? We have time for a question or two. Otherwise, Maureen.
It's great to see all that work. Are you partnering or collaborating with Canada's rare disease drug strategy in your work?
Yeah, that is a great question. So there is, a different branch within Health Canada that leads on the National Strategy on Drugs for Rare Diseases, also the National Pharmacare Strategy. We do work very, very closely with both of those groups and are trying to help as they are providing policy advice on how to spend the money that they have to make sure that there's a big pediatrics focus on those responses as well. So yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Hi, I'm curious in the pilot, and this may be too far down the line, whether you have plans to kind of do follow-up in 5-10 years, because there's data from PRIA in the US that shows that 10 years out, only 40% of the mandated pediatric clinical trials are actually completed. I know it's just a small kind of pilot, but I think that might be a really important piece to consider because PRIA has not really delivered very well so far.
Yeah, so I mean, it's all very complicated. We do talk extensively with the FDA and with the EMA as well. So the EMA is the European Medicines Agency about the success of their pediatric regulations. We've had lots of discussions with them about, would you have any advice for us? Anything that you implemented that you suggest we shouldn't, those kinds of discussions. Where it gets tricky is where there's lots of overlap for competing patients, probably especially in the oncology space, right? If you have 10 or more different trials that are, recruiting for AML, for example, or something like that, it gets tricky to recruit the patients. And that's why after 10 years, sometimes there's that gap. There are industry does go back to the regulator to say, listen, this is the situation we're in. We're having trouble recruiting these patients. We actually think that this drug, whether it's their drugs or a different sponsor's drug, might actually be a better fit. And so maybe we can focus, our recruiting or the recruiting of, those patients for this drug instead. So there is some of that does happen. The FDA and Europe, they do a follow-up because they have this plan that's sort of the placeholder for the pediatric data. And they have timelines. And if they don't meet their timelines, then they have to go back to the sponsor to negotiate new timelines or what the best course of action would be. So yes, definitely. If we were to implement anything or even with this pilot, that is something that we'd have to take into consideration for sure. Yeah, good point.
One more tiny question. Given that the theme of today is about designing for dyads, maybe you can speak to if you're aware of any incentives or pathways for supporting evidence submission for pregnancy and those who are pregnant in drug submissions. And if you don't know, feel free to say you don't know, but if there is anything going on around encouraging trials with pregnant folks, I think that we would love an update on that too, if you have one.
Absolutely. So I think it's probably public knowledge. So
looking at me like I don't know.
Pretty sure it is. So we work very closely with the ICH, the International Council for Harmonization of Pharmaceutical Products, a couple of other words there, but the International Council of Harmonization is the big one. And so that's a place where a bunch of regulators get together from across the country and industry gets together, and we develop globally harmonized guidance on particular issues. And sometimes they're very, very particular, and sometimes they're a bit more broad. So patient involvement, for example, would be an example of more of a broad guidance, or, yeah, exactly. Which is very, very, yeah, exactly. Like Q12, for example, is very, very specific. But there is work that has started through ICH on a guidance for the inclusion of pregnant people in clinical trials, which would be globally harmonized guidance. And I think help us get over the hurdle of, no, we need to protect that population from trials, which they did the same for children, which gets us into the situation where we just don't have products tested in those populations. And so I think that'll go a long way to help supporting more trials in that space.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And feel free if you have other questions to find Alicia. And she likes letters. You heard it here first. So if you want to send her letters, she will still come to our meeting.